Hello and welcome to Aralith, a Neverwinter Nights role-playing server. This is a series in which I showcase the adventures I have had and the kind of roleplay you can expect to find on Aralith. Most recently, we've followed the escapades of Alfred Hardy and how he managed to steal a batch of valuable metals from a blacksmith purely by chance. Upon attempting to sell the items in question, he was brought in for questioning by the City Watch, who accused Alfred of selling forged adamantine ingots. That is to say, forgeries. Ironically, no evidence of wrongdoing was found, and he was even reimbursed for the inconvenience. So here I was after the aforementioned events, innocently eavesdropping on some unsuspecting folks, when the blacksmith himself, Cage Ridri, suddenly enters center stage. I decide to leg it, but not before stopping to take a parting look. I wanted to gauge how Cage was doing. To see exactly how broken up about the loss of his precious ingots he was. It didn't seem like he was too upset. Ever since I robbed him, I felt like I owed him a chance to regain what he'd lost. That was one of the reasons why I made such obviously suspicious attempts to sell the stolen goods in the first place. The fact that I had been questioned about selling fake adamantine would have been easily put together with a report of stolen adamantine. At least that's how I pictured it. In retrospect, I probably should have approached him more directly in an offer to sell him back at least a portion of the goods I'd stolen. I just didn't know how he would react, and it would have been a fairly out-of-character decision on my part, following in the spirit of the be nice rule. After all, he was the one who went through the effort of spending hours to mine and craft the bloody things. All I did was pick his pocket in a matter of seconds. I got lucky. So, in an attempt to rid myself of the burden of guilt in exchange for wealth, I began to approach would-be clients. My strategy was much the same as before, looking for anyone capable of making use of such rare materials. One such individual I met in Sibayard, a desert island south of the Aralith coast. Mizuchihara, though suspicious at first, was willing to listen whilst on her way to Brogendenstein, the dwarven stronghold. Alfred, once again disguised as Crandyke, was a little peeved by the journey, but also in such desperate need of clients that there was no use arguing. Mizuchihara turned out to be quite a strict woman, and Alfred, being naturally docile, was prepared to jump through any hoops just to get this deal over and done with. If you really think about it, the fact that they ended up taking 3 separate voyages across the sea is pretty ridiculous. Despite it taking no time at all in-game, I can't help but wonder what the montage of that journey would have looked like in real time. Eventually, we make it to the shores of Brogendenstein, and a quick chat and a short hike later, we make it to the bank. Whilst she withdraws the money, I prepare the ingots for the transaction. Here is where I've made a crucial mistake. See, in order to make forgeries on Aralith, you usually pick an item that looks like the one you're forging, and then change its name and description using an enchantment basin. It can be difficult to tell the items apart, but usually such objects don't stack with one another. So by offering the ingots separately, Miss Hara grows suspicious and rescinds the deal. What's funny is that as soon as she declines the transaction, the ingots return to the inventory fully stacked. But by that point it was too late. She was gone along with the 50,000 she'd promised me. Fortunately, she has led us straight into the land of little metal workers, so I waste no time in attempting to find one willing to purchase some adamantine. It turns out dwarves have their pride, however, and would rather make the trip through burning hells themselves rather than buy what they need from someone else. So I returned back to my usual haunts, and even though I did spot Stellan Varg, the man Miss Uchihara had mentioned as a potential client, he also happens to be the commander of the City Watch. I've had far too many run-ins with them of late to pursue any trade. Instead, I'd overheard one of the bypassers talk about either being a smith or needing one, I can't remember which. But it sounded promising, so I decided to tail them. Aerith allows players to own their own lodgings, which usually contains a storage chest. You can access the property with a key or by picking a lock. The thing is, usually most houses have locks with difficulty checks so high that a rogue can't pick them on their own. Normal locks allow you to use thieves' tools to increase your skill, but player-owned housing uses a dialogue screen to interact with the door instead. Another deterrent are the traps, most of which are quite lethal, and ones that need to be disarmed in order for the door to open. Simply triggering the trap once is not enough to disarm it. This is why most thieves simply sneak into houses while the door is open. The ruling about this has changed over the years. Back in the day, this was not allowed because it exploits the use of loading screens, which means your character model is nowhere to be seen, even if someone were able to detect your presence. It also seems ridiculous that you could sneak in through the open door at the same time the owner is passing through it. Still, they've since relaxed about the rules and allowed it, at least at the time this was recorded. So we're in and able to grope around someone else's belongings. You may notice a warning saying you may only steal one item from each person in 24 hours. One item in this case refers to a stack of items, which is the reason I was able to get away with stealing 22 ingots in the first place. This rule also applies to anything stolen from storage chests, so if I have picked someone else's pocket, I cannot then go and ransack their house while at it. I must wait a grace period of 1 day. The reason for this is the inherently non-interactive nature of larceny. If you're on the receiving end of the interaction, you essentially have nothing to go on besides the fact that your hard-earned valuables are gone. Personally, I would like it if you could investigate storage chests the way you can investigate pools of blood or NPCs to figure out who has been taking what from the chest and when. This would open up a possible path to hunt down the individual behind the theft. In this case, I found nothing worth taking. When your projected profit margin is somewhere around $500,000, you tend to overlook such trifles as these. I was actually a little overburdened by loot, so I ended up dumping some of it in the chest. Feeling lighter after such displays of charity, Alfred stopped by the mirror to admire himself and was ready to relax when all of a sudden the doorway opened. A rogue needs to break line of sight in order to hide, but once hidden, can move around freely without much concern. Small objects can still make it harder for someone to spot you, so I dove behind the mirror again. If I hadn't pressed stealth in time before Valor entered the room, I wouldn't have been able to hide, since there was nothing in the room big enough to break line of sight. Only shadow dancers are able to hide in plain sight. Anyway, crisis averted. The dummy is none the wiser that I broke in and added some junk to his pile of junk. It's time to make a quick exit. The best way to do this is by leaving as soon as someone opens the door for you. The door is not locked from the inside, so in theory you could just leave whenever. But if there is someone outside, they might grow suspicious when their door keeps opening and closing on its own. If someone else is passing through it, then everyone will be forced to conclude that it was they who passed through the door and no one else. Back in town, everyone's celebrating Stellan Varg's birthday. A joyous occasion to be sure. Alfred, still keen to do business, chooses to linger at his usual corner. Perhaps he should have come forth bearing gifts to the birthday boy. At least then he'd be rid of this stuff. One of the reasons I was so keen to get rid of it all was because of how heavy it is to carry around with you. It severely limits what you can do. I can't pickpocket people as freely as I used to, for fear of being over-encumbered should I manage to lay my hands on any more valuables. It doesn't even have to be that heavy, since I'm already pushing the limit. A thief who can't run is a dead thief. If anyone catches you in the act, they're well within their rights to pummel you to death in order to get their items back. I'm not sure if the victim is the one who has to land the killing blow in order for that to happen, or if anyone is able to retrieve the items from a thief by killing them. I presume it's mostly an interaction between the two parties involved, and any bystander is exempt for this. Finally, the party is over and everyone disperses in separate directions. In the end, I managed to corner Valor long enough to offer my services to him. Although, upon rewatching this, I noticed that neither of us even mentioned Adamantine by name. While I'd like to think it's commonplace for black market dealers to be able to read their customers' minds, I can't help but wonder if some form of metagaming was involved here. It's either that or I neglected to record a prior interaction between the two of us where we explicitly mention what we're after. Regardless, it's not strictly speaking an offense in a case like this, but any form of metagaming has its downsides if it becomes a habit. Especially if I were to promise to sell my adamantine exclusively to friends or acquaintances outside the game. I'm not saying that's what happened here, but clearly there's some Freudian slip taking place. Either way, we managed to secure the deal and get away 60,000 gold richer. Surprisingly a lot of work, to be honest. Selling this stuff, I'd much rather be doing all the thievery than fencing it off, so to speak. It would actually be kind of neat if you could find a fence willing to buy this stuff directly. You know, a black market merchant is a cool idea for a roleplay character. Perhaps later on I'll explore that, or the separate character. But Alfred was never meant to be that. Alfred was always more of an impulsive thief, and very innocent, for the most part. As a one-man operation, you have your work cut out for you. If you had a crew who you could trust in a pinch, and rely on when you needed to sell your stolen goods, then this would have gone a lot smoother. This is where the Guard usually have the upper hand. They're able to openly advertise in order to recruit new members. You get to participate in such fun activities as combat training in the local arena. Here we have Stellan Varg leading an exercise routine in order to teach the guards how to defuse a situation and detain someone. As a keen learner, Alfred is first on the scene to find out what ways the guards have in store for one such as himself. It's easier to plan your getaway when you know what your opponent has been taught to throw at you. Stellan actually makes some good points about how you should handle yourself in a conflict. In a mage's arsenal, for instance, the most useful spell is Paralysis. Most thieves have fairly low will saving throws to resist such a spell, but there are potions that make you immune, ones that I plan to stock up on from now on. The advice here is to keep casting until the spell has taken effect, as this way your fleeing target won't slip away whilst you wait for the spell to reach them. Combat is a tricky subject on Aralith, namely because of how quickly it can end. In a tabletop scenario, you have a lot of time to plan your moves and react to what someone is doing due to the turn-based nature of the game. Neverwinter Nights, on the other hand, is a blend of real-time and turn-based combat. There are turns and rounds and flurries of attacks, all of which are handled seamlessly by the engine of the game so that you don't even notice they're there. Initiative in a tabletop game is incredibly important when it comes to determining who gets to react first, but in Neverwinter Nights, it is practically useless, as the one who pulls the trigger first has the upper hand. Hence why Aralith has had to come up with a rule that forces its players to exchange a few words that make it clear that someone is about to die before anyone throws the first punch. If that rule were not in place, then you might find yourself cut down by a weapon master's sword or have your soul sucked out by a banshee's wail before you know it. Knowing that you're about to be attacked is an important step in your survival. Here the guards are trained to act as both the defender and attacker to better prepare themselves for each role should the need arise one day to take such action outside the training circle. I find the cards themselves have a lot of very good excuses to involve themselves in other people's roleplay without being intrusive. When guards are out grinding experience, they're usually on patrol or on an important mission from their superiors. So if you find that your character is lacking a purpose, it's not a bad idea to join the Cordorian Guard and spice up your roleplay. Or you could be a thief and spice up their roleplay. Either way, my name has been Juke, and I will see you next time. Until then, goodbye.